The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
Episode 73, Ham Radio 360 podcast. It's going to be a great time. We're going to learn more about APRS and hear from some of the listeners coming up.
MTCRadio.com presents Ham Radio 360, the podcast. Brought to you by Elecraft. Now, here's your host, Kel Nelson, K4CDN.
So here we are again, the Ham Radio 360 podcast, episode number 73, y'all. Is that crazy? You know, we like to number things in our society for whatever reason, 5-year anniversary, 25-year anniversary, and podcasting is the same way. If you make it to episode 7, you've actually started, and when you get to 10, it's really exciting. 25 is a big deal. 50 was huge for us because we completely rebranded what we were doing. And 75 will be a big deal as well, I'm sure. But 73 has a special place in our hearts because it's what we say on the air, right? We finish a QSO, we say 73. So I'm going to make a big deal out of episode number 73. And it's going to be a great show, by the way. We got Kenneth Finnegan coming back in here with us, and we're going to talk about some listener questions, and we're going to have the answers. Well, actually, Kenneth is going to have the answers for you about APRS. That original show we did spurred so much interest, we brought him back in to answer some questions we received following the initial airing of that show. In addition to that, we're going to have some listeners peppered throughout the show as they give out their call sign and they say 73 for us. So anyway, it's going to be a great time. Really excited to have you here again. It's so much fun to create this podcast. I'm back from PodFest. I'm pumped up, ready to get it on. We're looking forward to Hamvention. A lot of great things coming the way, and I'm just so excited to be here with you. I'm also excited to be able to share with you about our sponsors here on the show. Yeah, we've been sponsored from day one by Main Trading Company down in Paris, Texas. Richard and Christine Lenore started this thing in their garage. Don't all good things start in a garage? You know what? I'll call my barn a garage for this moment and say it started in a garage as well. But, it takes a lot to run a business, especially a mom and pop small business. My wife and I have been doing that since 2001. It's tough. It's really hard. But I tell you what, if you work hard, it pays off. And one of the ways it can pay off for you, the listener, is to do some shopping with my friends at MTCRadio.com. They carry the entire line of ICOM, everything from the top to the bottom. If you need an HF rig, maybe just a handy-talkie, maybe a replacement microphone, you need to call them and check them out. Anything from ICOM can be found at mtcradio.com. Remember to let them know you heard about them here on Ham Radio 360 Podcast.
AC9KF 73.
This is AE5TE 73.
AI6OU 73.
K2AMP 73. K3NXU 73.
Okay, so we've talked about having a Q&A, a follow-up, a part 2 to our APRS show with Kenneth Finnegan, and we're going to do it right now. Kenneth, welcome back to Ham Radio 360 Podcast.
Hey, Kale, thanks for having me. And yeah, the turnout has been just phenomenal. The number of emails I've gotten from people saying, they haven't done APRS in 10 years, and my show, the show that we did, gotten back into has been great.
Yeah. Well, we kind of tried to get people excited about it, and it looks like we succeeded. So thank you again for that. It may be a 30-year-old technology, but it's still cool to see it working and getting people more involved in it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we got a lot of questions. We have some answers, and we want to just kind of dive right into those questions, if that's okay with you, listener. And we want to take the first question here from Andrew. Andrew's call is Kilo Fox 7, Charlie. Love that one. And he says, I know I'm supposed to use paths like wide 1-1, but why? And what does that mean? What else might I use in my path and why? So before you answer that real quick, explain again what a path is, and then if you can kind of touch on the question there with wide 1-1 or whatever he wants to use.
Yeah, so to understand what a path is and why we need them, it requires a little bit of a history lesson.
Okay.
Right? So let's go back to 1980, if we will.
Nice.
1980, the FCC finally authorizes amateur radio operators to operate packet radio. Right. So before that, we weren't allowed to use packet on the air. And so out in Tucson, the Tucson Amateur Packet Radio Corporation was founded through that. And they started developing this whole packet radio network stack, right? Because before then, like, there wasn't anything, like nothing existed. And so they got a whole working group together. They were working with a group up in Canada. Canada got about a 2-year head start on us, and so they had some stuff coming out of Vancouver. And so they were looking around at that point, trying to figure out what is the cutting edge in networking technology in 1980, and they then based packet radio off of that. Right? We're getting back to amateur radio in a second, but so 1980, TCP/IP, like we use it today, was not at all the clear-cut winner for networking technology. There were several different families of networking technology going on, including X25.
Okay.
X25 is just a different networking stack, different protocol sort of type. And at this point, the concept of dynamic routing protocols or intelligent routers like we have now today just wasn't a thing. This concept that you could take a packet, put it the address of where it was going to finally go and drop it in a mailbox like you do a letter, didn't exist for computer networks in 1980, right? And so any old graybeards out there that can remember having to write email addresses of a whole bunch of different host names separated by exclamation marks, that's something called source routing, where you have to fully describe, when you put a packet on the network, exactly where it is eventually needs to go, hop by hop by hop, right? Okay. It isn't a very good system. And in the sphere of the internet, they went and figured out how to do dynamic routing protocols in the mid 80s, and so that normal users don't need to know which individual computers are linked together with hard telephone lines to get their email to their friend on the other coast. So that's the context of where amateur packet radio is starting. And so the concept of a path is when you want a packet to propagate out through the network, you need to specify which digital repeaters it'll go through as it makes this journey, right? And so for packet radio, which in the 80s and 90s was all these bulletin boards where you could send long form messages and chat, much as you do like PSK31 or something, right. You would just have to describe, all right, I want to go through digipeater, K6AAA, and then for the second hop after that, I want to go through K8BBB, and just go hop by hop through this pathway, right? And so that's what paths were. And APRS, the big innovation in APRS was that they realized that this was very tedious, having to sit at your computer and map out what your local digipeaters were, right? Because like if you have a home station, like sure, you can sit down and listen to the radio and see the beacons from the digipeters, and you can kind of sit there and draw a map in your notebook about where the digipeters are and which ones you have to go hop by hop. But in APRS, the concept is that you're going to be a mobile user, right? You are dropping out of the sky, and in 10 minutes you want to be functional, right? And so they came up with this concept of aliases. So the wide alias is essentially a, quote, call sign, unquote, that every digipeter responds to. You follow me, Cale, here?
Yeah. So what you're saying here is when we use wide 1-1, we're telling our signal to go out and find anybody around me that's listening, because everybody can hear wide 1-1 if they can hear my signal. Does that make sense? Is that the right question to ask?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So the wide 1-1 is essentially you, instead of addressing a single specific digipeter that you want to hop through, you're saying you're addressing all of them at once. And so your packets actually ripple outwards like in a pond.
Okay. So right? Anybody that can hear that knows what to do with it then.
Exactly.
Okay.
And of course, there's going to be some edge cases where you're not going to set up digipeters that respond to wide wide, but other things. But we're grossly simplifying it here, and I'm skipping over about 15 years of history of them developing this system.
Right. Okay. Right. But that answers the question. Why he knows he's supposed to use wide 1-1. Yeah. And the reason being is so someone can hear you and digipete your signal and move it on down the line. Okay.
Right. But then the question is, what does the two numbers mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because really what we're talking about is for the networking folks in the audience, what we're essentially doing is we're making a flooding multicast network where wide is this alias that a certain group of digipeaters respond to, where in this case, wide is all of them, and then in individual localities, you might set up additional other aliases, which we'll talk about later.
Sure.
But then there's a question of, what do these two numbers mean afterwards, right? And so oftentimes when people are talking about this aliased system that APRS uses, they call it wide n-n, right? Where it's a lowercase n and then an uppercase n.
Okay.
So these two numbers, the first one represents how many hops did I originally request, and the second number is how many of those hops are left, right? And so wide 1-1 means I'm asking for one hop through a wide digipeater, and it hasn't happened yet, right? There's still one of the one left.
Right.
And so if you were to then see a digipeater alias like wide 3-3, that would mean I'm asking for 3 hops through these wide digipeaters, and 3 of them are left over. The first digipeaters that are right around you that hear that would repeat it, and they'd insert their call sign into the path and then decrement the second number. So it would become K6AAA, hop used up with a little star on the end, and then wide 3-2.
Okay.
Right? And so then every digipeater that hears K6AAA would say, oh, hey, look, there's still 2 of these 3 hops left. They'd insert their call sign in after K6AAA and decrement it to wide 3-1. You would then go one more ring of digipeaters out, and they'd go, oh, hey, look, there's 1 hop left, and they would decrement it. So the final path would be, K6AAA, K6BBB, K6CCC, wide 3 with no hops left.
So this is something you can do, but just my limited knowledge is that's really not something you want to do, because it's just getting you way too far away from where you are.
Yeah, and remember, we're only talking about one string of digipeaters going off in the northern direction.
Right.
This is happening exponentially in every direction. And so if you were to beacon with a path of wide 7-7, like here in the Silicon Valley, if I were to beacon with a path of wide 7-7, I would reach all the way to Washington and Arizona.
And nobody over there, nobody really cares what you're doing in Washington and Arizona.
No, they really don't.
They don't want your traffic in their system.
Yes. So there's a problem there.
Okay.
All right. And so as a rule of thumb, you're usually only going to ever want to ask for 2 hops and almost never ask for more than 3. So if you're listening to this and you're looking at your blank path field in your tracker and you want to put something in there, the easiest default answer is wide 1-1, wide 2-1.
Okay.
Right? But I just said something that doesn't match the pattern, didn't I?
Yeah.
And that's because APRS is a layer upon layer upon layer of hacks, remember? Because this whole concept of this time to live field at the end of a single call sign that gets decremented as it gets processed by digipeaters, that wasn't part of the AX25 spec when it was used for bulletin boards. Mm-hmm. And APRS has been built on generations of throw-offs from the packet radio, other packet radio uses that are now just laying around and not being used.
Okay.
And so in APRS, they also wanted to support what are called fill-in digipeaters, right? So you've got your high-level digipeaters, and then you have these smaller ones. And a fill-in digipeater is so if you've got a high-level digipeater that covers a certain geographical area, a fill-in digipeter is something that's going to be on your house or maybe on your eaves or maybe only a few dozen feet up.
Right.
That still its coverage area fully falls inside the coverage area of this high-level digipeater, and so you're not adding any new geographical area to the network. What you're doing is you're adding an extra receiver that can help shuttle very quiet or very compromised antenna trackers up to this big network of digipeaters you have on mountaintops, right? Because if you've got a digipeater up on a mountaintop and you're trying to hear a 2-watt tracker in your pocket, you may not be able to reach all the way up to the mountaintop. So you have these fill-ins that as the first hop only, can pick up your packet and shuttle it up to the mountaintop.
Okay. And I've got a fill-in digipeater, and that's really why we put it in. Well, I was kind of but anyway, that's why it's there. It's just listening for somebody who may be missed.
Exactly. Right, but the people building these fill-in digipeaters had hardware that didn't understand this wide N-N concept. And they didn't want to buy all new TNCs just for these little fill-ins that cover no new geographical area and are just an assistance to the network.
Right.
And so a couple guys came up with this idea of, well, why don't we hard code an alias of wide 1-1 for these fill-in digipeaters? And so these devices that don't understand this N-N time to live field instead just go, oh, hey, look, there is this string wide 1-1 that matches my hard-coded alias. I'll digipede it.
Okay.
And then when it gets up to the high-level digipeters, they go, oh, look, there's one hop through someone, and now there's a time to live wide N-N field that I can then process normally.
Okay.
Then you've got the problem that we're now designating wide 1-1 as a alias for the fill-ins. But how do you ask for one hop through high-level digipeters after that, right? Because if you wanted to go one hop through maybe a fill-in and then two more hops afterwards, you could say wide 1-1, comma, wide 2-2, right? So you're asking for this one special alias of wide 1-1 and then two more wide hops that you've still got two of them left.
Right.
And of course, if a high-level digipeater happens to hear this wide 1-1, it goes, oh, hey, look, he's asking for one hop and there's one of them left. He processes it normally, right? And so, that's why this is so clever, because everyone responds to wide 1-1, and then the high-level digipeters also respond to all other permutations of these numbers. But they couldn't. There's no way then to annotate, I want one hop not from fill-in digipeters, right? Because if you want one hop and there's one left, that's wide 1-1, which is the fill-in alias. And so they came up with this idea of, well, why don't you beacon with a path of wide 2, but you pre-consume one of the hops? And so instead of beaconing with wide 2-2, which is two hops with two left, send it out of your tracker originally as wide 2-1, so that it's I originally asked for two hops, but there's only one of them left when we start.
You
right?
Sit around and you wonder, wow, how did somebody conceive that? But
yeah,
it makes sense.
I actually, all right, and as part of my master's thesis, when I was working on this, I found the whole email thread where they were going through this, and they were working about different permutations and all the different things that they thought experimented out and doing it. And I saw them circling in on the final answer, and like, oh God, like the kludge is going to be, oh, there it is. Yeah. So
it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark for APRS.
Yes, right. So that's what it is.
Okay.
So and kind of the recommended path for most mobile trackers is you request one hop through fill-ins, and then you request just one more hop through a high-level digipeter. So that's the wide 1-1, comma, wide 2-1.
And that makes plenty of sense to me. That I've had that question for 2 years now. Thank you.
Yeah, right. And so it's really, really unfortunate that the primary use case for these paths is the one exception to the rule about what the two numbers mean. Right.
But that's the best way to set it up for folks who are just getting their feet in, just like Andrew here. Why do I want to use that? But don't forget, if you're doing a tracker, 1-1, comma, 2-1.
Yes. Okay. Right. So now let's talk about other types of trackers that aren't 5 watt or maybe a 10 watt with a little antenna on maybe a vehicle or in your pocket.
Okay.
If you're setting up a base station at your house as an APRS node that you want to talk to people, you've probably got a nice antenna up on the eaves of your house, or maybe you've got a little tower. You might be running more than 5 watts. You're probably running it into like a 25 or 50 watt mobile radio. Mm-hmm. And so you really probably don't necessarily need the services of the fill-in digipeater down the block from you, Right. Not that there's another digipeater anywhere close to you, Cale, but we can always hope.
In the future sense, we're talking, future tense.
Right.
Here.
In the ideal world. Right. And so as a fixed radio, as a non-mobile APRS node that doesn't need services from fill-ins, you should just never use the wide 1-1 alias. So if you want to go out 1 hop, you use wide 2-1. If you want to go out 2 hops, you use wide 2-2. And if you want to go out 3 hops, you do wide 3-3, right? And so you're just never going to need this wide 1-1 alias if you're not in a compromised antenna sort of situation.
Okay. Let me stop you there real quick and just ask you this. And this is redundant, but I'm going to say it because I'm thinking it. That means maybe somebody else is. Going back, if we're doing a mobile portable rig, okay, we have 2 aliases, right? Mm-hmm. When we're setting up a base station with a uncompromised, higher gain antenna, higher power radio, we use 1 alias.
Well, yeah. And
that's kind of the rule of thumb. It doesn't have to be set in stone, but it's kind of the rule of thumb.
Yeah, and if digipeaters were intelligent enough so that the fill-ins didn't need this separate special alias,
right,
you could just always use 1 alias that has, like I want service from wide digipeaters, and here's my number of time to live, right?
Right, but we're not there.
And well, that depends who you ask, right? Because APRX, the digipeater software that I maintain, I'm not limited to running on a 25-year-old Z80 microcontroller with a UV EEPROM in it. I'm running on a full Linux board, so I can program in as much intelligence as I want. And so APRX actually doesn't depend on wide 1-1 aliases. It's intelligent enough that it looks at the whole path and only digipeats you if it is the first hop.
Okay.
So,
but that could be that's a whole other show.
Right? Yeah, that's like it's a little bit non-standard, and I catch flack from some of the old guys because it doesn't support wide 1-1. I'm like, well, yeah, but it just always services the first hop, which is exactly what you want.
Yeah, yeah.
Because some people will accidentally put a wide 1-1 alias not in the first field, right? So let's imagine that you beaconed with an alias of wide 2-1, 1-1. So you go up and you light up all the high-level digipeaters around you, right? So maybe there's 3 or 4 of them within range. Okay. And so from these mountaintops, they then repeat you with the first hop consumed and then this wide 1-1 alias after them. So the 15 fill-in digipeaters in all the little nooks and crannies of your local geography all now respond to the second hop, and you light up every digipeater in the county.
Wow. It sends you back to where you came from.
Yeah, right. And so there's this the fundamental problem with this source routing is that it's very sensitive to every user needs to not misconfigure their own tracker because a single user beaconing wide 7-7 takes down the whole state.
Yeah, yeah. So to go right back to the beginning, if you're setting up a portable tracker, low power, handy talkie kind of gig, portable like you're taking with you in your backpack, wide 1-1 dash comma wide 2-1. That's what you want. Okay. If we're going to do a mobile station or a base station, high power, uncompromised antenna, high gain antenna, something like that, high level digipeater, like you like to call it, we're doing 2-1 and that's it.
Yep.
Okay.
Or if you maybe if you want to go 2 hops out, wide 2-2.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So we just set some unofficial standards here on the show.
Yes. Right. Now there's this third class of station that is also very important to talk about, and that is airborne stations.
Like balloons and airplanes.
Balloons, airplanes, those sorts of things, right?
Okay.
Because when you're at 60,000 or 100,000 feet, you don't need digipeaters.
Okay. So what do you do?
Right. You beacon with no path at all. Right. And this is something that is very contentious, and I've had many arguments with the high altitude balloon guys. But when you're beaconing from 100,000 feet,
right,
just beacon with a path that is completely empty because you don't need any digipeater service because you have a coverage area that is 10 or 100 times larger than any digipeater that you can see.
Right. So you're doing a third of the country at the same time.
Yes, right. And so it happens every few months or so that someone launches a balloon with a half-watt tracker on it that is beaconing every 30 seconds with a path of wide 2-1 or a wide 1-1. And I've seen one of these, these balloons come out of the Bay Area all the time, and so it goes up to 60,000 feet and is lighting up digipeters all the way from Los Angeles to the Oregon border every 30 seconds, right? And so it's you don't need it.
It's just eating traffic,
right?
or blocking traffic, whatever the term to use.
Yeah, right. And so it's one of these things. You're consuming so much of the network capacity for this one tracker that doesn't need it, because usually these guys are really only interested in it getting into the internet, right? And so just as you're lighting up 30 or 40 digipeters, you're also hitting 50 or 100 internet gateways that are all hearing you directly before the digipeters echo you again, right? And this is one of those things where if you look at some of the APRS websites, they don't really give firm guidance on this. They'll go, well, if you really need to, you can use one hop, but you maybe shouldn't, right? I'm telling the high altitude balloon guys right now, do not use hops, right?
Well, you're not scolding someone. You're just saying it's in the best interest of APRS. Yeah. You don't need it.
Yeah, you don't need it, right? And the counter argument from the high altitude balloon guys listening to their phones right now, yelling at us, is, well, but what about once the balloon pops and it lands on the ground? And in that case, it very is legitimate to, like, once you're no longer at 60,000 feet and you're now sitting in a ravine somewhere, maybe you do need a digipeter hop. But many of these trackers that they're deploying are actually intelligent enough to be able to tell, I no longer have an altitude of 60,000 feet. They can switch paths dynamically and go from a empty path to a wide 1-1 path.
And there's a whole other show topic right there. Wow, I'm making a list.
There's a whole, right? Yeah, like we're cranking these things out here. But yeah, so to summarize, mobile trackers, wide 1-1, wide 2-1. Okay. Ground stations or fixed locations, wide 2-1, wide 2 or wide 2-2. And high altitude trackers in planes and balloons, empty path, but once you cut the balloon and fall back to the ground, your trackers possibly support a way to dynamically switch to a second path so that when you're out there looking for it, you can find your tracker sitting in a hillside.
I got you. That makes sense. Yeah. Andrew, that was a great question from Andrew, man. That's a segment's worth of question. And it's one that I could never, people would say, oh, well, you're using the wrong path. And I'm like, why? And of course, no one can explain it to you.
Yeah, right. And it's this giant congestive collapse that you can cause across the whole state.
Right. I got you. Okay. Well, we're going to come right back with Kenneth Finnegan, and we're going to continue to learn about APRS here on Ham Radio 360 Podcast. Elecraft Radio is hands-on ham radio, and you can find all that you need to know about them, all their tremendous products, and more at elecraft.com.
KO4L 73.
K4GDL 73.
73, y'all. This is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike.
This is Kilo 5 Romeo Hotel Delta 73.
K7OJL 73.
All right, I got another question for you, Kenneth. This one comes from Ryan, who is Whiskey Charlie 6 Quebec, from Twitter. He asked, why is it when I switch on my APRS and there are 2 digipeters within 2 miles, I get nothing for spots on APRS.FI with my 5-watt handheld?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that kind of comes back to distinguishing between the different types of APRS infrastructure. Right, because you've got both digipeters and internet gateways, and the two of them are different things. And so digipeters extend your range on the local RF side, and so that when there's 2 digipeters within range of him, he's probably getting out pretty far locally. But if there isn't any internet gateways at all within range of him or those digipeters, he may be going around on the RF locally, but he won't be making it back to the APRS internet system, APRS IS.
I got you.
And so it may be that he is locally showing up on other people's radios if they were listening, but since there's no internet gateways, he never gets onto the internet. And APRS FI, all that is another client of the APRS IS system. And all it does is it listens to the stream of packets on the internet and saves it in its database. And so if he never makes it to the internet, he never makes it onto APRS.FI.
And that kind of shows us that there are three possibilities of this APRS thing. It's local RF through the wides, it's the internet, or a combination of both. And really, it may be one of those things, if you want to kind of see some of the stuff on the internet, it might be a good idea for somebody like Ryan here to put up an iGate, which are pretty simple to do. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because setting up an internet gateway, it can be as simple as just finding some old like Radio Shack scanner you've got, audio cable to your computer, and that's essentially all you need for a real basic iGate. Nice. It doesn't have to be hard. Although Kel will try to make it hard, but it doesn't have to be. Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, why not? Okay. All right, next question here. We've got it from some Reddit readers. Is that what you call them if they're on Reddit? Are they Redditors? Redditors? Redditors, yeah.
Redditors.
Yeah, Redditors.
Guys, I don't get over there to Reddit very much, but it doesn't mean I don't love you and I don't appreciate you. It's just I just don't get a lot of time over there. So please excuse me. And if you see me, say, hey, maybe I'll come back more often. Jason's call I have here is Alpha Kilo Zero Whiskey. Nice call, by the way. He says, I can't seem to get APRS messaging to work. I can send a test message to myself or WX bot and can see it show up on aprs.link under message history, but the message never makes it back to my radio. Do you have any idea on what's going on? Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, so probably what's happening here is in his local network, he's got, so obviously he's making it to he's using APRS.link, which I think is much like APRS.FI, right? It's one of the many websites online that listen to the IS system.
Okay.
And so what might be going on here is that he has what's called a receive-only iGate. Remember how I said that you can set up an iGate with just a Radio Shack scanner? Yeah, right? And so on his radio, he beacons the message. The message gets picked up by this receive-only iGate and gets gated to the internet system. But the last part of a message is that the destination for the message needs to send an acknowledgement packet, and that needs to make it back to him. But if he's messaging someone that's not on his local RF and is instead somewhere else, across the internet, that packet's coming back to his iGate, his nearby iGate online. But if his nearby internet gateway is receive only and doesn't have a transmitter, then it's never going to be able to get it back to his radio. And so what you need locally, right? So there are these receive only iGates, which help you show up on the internet. But if you want to have bidirectional conversations with someone else, you need what's called a RF gate, right? Which is an internet gateway that has a transmitter that can gateway back onto RF as well. And so if there's no RF gates in range, all of his messages will make it to the other end fine, but none of their acknowledgments or their response messages will actually make it back to him.
It just kind of comes near him and stops because it can't find any RF to escape on.
Yeah, it'll send it to all the nearby iGates that picked him up originally, and they'll all go, great, I don't have a transmitter, and do nothing with the packet.
Real quick, is it really hard to build one of those?
It's a little bit more difficult because at that point you need to both get receive audio wired up, you need your transmit audio wired up, you need to wire up a push-to-talk mechanism somehow for your radio, and then you also need to set your deviation levels correctly, which on Bell 202, which is the modem that APRS uses, it's a little bit easier than on some other data modems. Kind of the trick that I've been told for people. How I do it is I just use a terminal node controller in what's called KISS mode. And so the TNC handles all the radio interfacing, and then it has a serial port that goes back to my computer. And then to set the deviation levels, I use a service monitor, which I don't think most people have in their shack since they're several $1,000s.
Probably not.
So I can appreciate why most people just don't happen to have a service monitor on their bench. But kind of with Bell 202, kind of the trick is you can turn up the transmit audio level on the TNC until you don't hear it get any louder, and then kind of turn it halfway down again.
Okay.
Right, because your radio will start limiting and clipping it, and so you then turn it back about halfway, and that'll be passably good.
just good enough to hear it and get it back out. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, if you have a service monitor, what you want to set is 3 to 3.5 kilohertz deviation. Like that's the number that you want. But most people don't have VHF deviation meters.
Mm-hmm. So they just use your volume control.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So like when I'm setting up a RF gate, I'll hook it up to my service monitor, put the TNC in tune mode, and then it's usually got like a little potentiometer or there's a variable in the settings, and I just turn it up until the deviation gets where I want it on the radio.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Good answer. We have another Redditor here. His call is Kilo Delta 7 Mike Romeo Juliet. His name is Adam. And Adam says, what are the implications regulation-wise with running an Internet to RF gateway? And he explains that he is interested in an SMS Gate. I'm assuming that's what that means. And it seems to work well for messages sent from the radio to SMS. However, my area doesn't have any gateways which can take packets from the Internet and retransmit them onto RF, which we just discussed. I know that there are some worries there around the fact that only licensed hams should be able to have messages transmitted out into the ham bands. How does this apply to an APRS gateway like this? And if I try to build something that only retransmits from senders who are registered with the system, will that cover it?
Yeah, so this is kind of one of the sticky issues that we debate constantly on the APRS SIG, and really comes down to exactly how you interpret Part 97 of the federal code, which, of course, all hams love to give their opinions on how to interpret Title 47, Part 97.
Yeah.
Right, and it comes down to, this third-party traffic concerns on the automatic message relay systems, right? Because APRS, the best way to define APRS in the context of Title 47 of Part 97 is that it is a automatic message system, which gives it a couple, it drops into some category there that kind of fits most of APRS's definitions. But there's that problem of third-party traffic. And once you hook up RF gates, you're now passing third-party traffic from the internet. And that's problematic. How the APRS went about this originally was when you try and connect to the APRS IS as either an internet gateway or as like a tracker on your phone using IP directly to APRS IS, is you have to use a passcode. Is it's typically about a 5-digit number. And the concept originally was you would contact one of the developers of APRS. You would give them your call sign. They would verify that you're an amateur, and they would then issue you back this passcode. The problem was that, and so that's the concept, right? And so at that point, you've confirmed that this person is an amateur, and you're good. The issue is that this 10-digit number, or this 5-digit number, it was just a hash of your call sign. And so once this algorithm for the passcodes leaked out, you can now go online and just hash your call sign, and there's your passcode. And so, like any security system that was designed by not security professionals, it's pretty weak, and it's not ideal. And there's been efforts to try and move the APRS IS over to something like SSL for authentication using like the Logbook of the World certificates. But at this point, how it stands is that we do, quote, authenticate people using this APRS IS passcode. And personally, I find that's good enough for me. I know a lot of people that find that not acceptable and will refuse to run their own RF gates. So I've not heard of any real issues with abuse of people logging to the IS that aren't hams. And I'm really hard-pressed to imagine if anyone were to accidentally pass inappropriate third-party traffic that the FCC would legally go after you. The problems that we're exposed to due to this poor security system are pretty far down there as far as issues on the amateur bands.
Right. Yeah. Well,
right.
I'm sitting here thinking, who in the world would want to fool with this if they weren't geeky like us?
Yeah. Of all the targets online, this one is relatively unattractive.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a bad argument to use, right? And so I think it's one of those things that everyone individually kind of needs to make the decision: are they willing to run an RF gate or not? So,
gotcha.
And then just kind of answer the sub question that you didn't quite ask in there for SMS Gate.
Yes.
So SMS Gate is one of these internet connected services that gateways between APRS and other networks, right? And so SMS GTE, SMS Gate is one of them. Email-2 is another one. And all they do is they gateway APRS messages onto other systems. And so SMS Gate is actually a system where you can send an APRS message to that call sign, SMS GTE, with a phone number and a message, and it will actually relay it to that cell phone number as a text message.
Yeah, I remember reading about that somewhere. Maybe QST had an article a few years back or something, but it was almost like maybe it was just learned or just heard about, or somebody just got it out, but it was real hot for like 30 minutes and just kind of went away.
Yeah. I've actually been working with helping the developer of SMS Gate kind of add some more features to it so that you can like save specific numbers as like aliases and stuff.
Oh, that'd be cool.
It's a pretty neat system, and I have made a point of kicking him a few bucks on PayPal because it does cost him something like 10 cents per text message that he gateways or something. Whoa. But he's willing to do it. So
is this something like your mom could text you through that way on the APRS? Yeah. Okay. And it's kind of cloudy just a little bit because of third-party traffic, but it's still going to an amateur.
Yes, okay. Right. And so he is relaying it from a non-licensed user onto our licensed network, and then your local RF gate is passing that third-party traffic from the internet to the RF. And it's real hazy about exactly where in there the appropriateness of the message was confirmed, but again, it just hasn't been an issue. And even if there was an inappropriate message on APRS, I'm not convinced that that's really going to cause anyone problems.
Yeah. So it's almost, and not to just keep beating this horse, but it's almost like a new version of the national traffic stuff where they just pass it around and the guy calls you on the phone and gives you your message.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that one. And again, thank you, Adam, for that question. Another Redditor here. We have a question from Jeff, who has a pretty cool call. I like this one, KK9JEF. That makes sense to me. Jeff asks here, are there bands beside 2 meters that have active APRS presence? Is there a case or a use case for using more than one band or a different band?
Yeah, so that's a good question. First of all, hi, Jeff. Jeff was actually my first exposure to amateur radio back in middle school.
Thank you, Jeff.
Right, he was he was one of my buddies back in middle school, and he's now over in Chicagoland and got a new call sign. But yeah, so his question: there are bands other than 2 meters, right? Because the continental, the North American continental frequency that we all kind of agreed on was 144.39, right? Remember that.
Right.
There is also APRS traffic on 30 meters.
Robust packet. Is that? No, wait a minute. That's not what they call robust packet. But
we're now venturing into parts of APRS that I know less about, right? Exactly. So 30 meters, if you think about it, APRS on 30 meters is really cool because all of a sudden you don't need digipeaters anymore.
Right.
Because you can beacon on the West Coast and be picked up by iGates on the East Coast, straight simplex, right? And so 30 meters, there are advantages. And so like when you are way out there and there is no local iGates or digipeaters, 30 meters is a real attractive option. With the disadvantage, of course, that you then have to have an antenna for 30 meters, which is probably a bit more difficult to have in your HT or on your car than a 2-meter whip. But you of course asked, you alluded to, well, is it a robust packet? And the question is, and the answer is, I'm not entirely sure what it is these days.
Okay.
Because it was originally Bell 103, which is the classic 300 baud HF packet. And then they added PSK 63 on about the same frequency, but you could do either one. And then there was like robust packet. And then there was like, I've heard mentions of like 1 or 2 other modems. So as far as I can tell, around this one watering hole frequency that they've got set up, there's about 4 or 5 different modems being used by different trackers.
Okay.
Right.
And that makes sense to me. It's just it's on the 30 meter band, so it's a lot more broad necessarily than just knocking it down to 144.39.
Yeah. And so this is of course, like all APRS documentation, there's huge website, long, wall of text on the whole history of all these different modems that they've used. But even I don't know, if I were to set up a 30 meter tracker right now, what modem to use. Okay. How to get on 30 meters is something that I don't know anything about.
Well, Jeff, you might have just opened up a whole other can of worms for a future show.
Oh, right. As far as other than 30 meters, there are some small local networks that are set up on different frequencies. So some local groups will set up APRS on UHF, particularly if for an event you wanted to use a VHF repeater for your voice communications. There's, of course, then an advantage to setting up an APRS network on UHF so that you don't desense your radios when the tracker goes off. And so then you just have the problem that you then need to build a whole infrastructure on some other frequency than 144.39. But it's certainly possible, and there are some pockets of places where people do it.
And that leads us to our next question from Pongo000 from Reddit as well. He just asked, why are we all using just one APRS frequency? Back in the 90s, we made use of a number of frequencies. Is there some operational advantage gained by using only one frequency rather than gatewaying across different freaks?
Yeah, right. And so back in the 90s, he's probably referring to like the bulletin board system, where in the bulletin board system, there was, 10 packet frequencies centered around 145.
Wow.
Right. And so it was, 145.01, 145.03, and 144.99, 144.97, and they went out for 100 kilohertz. And that made a lot of sense on bulletin boards because a lot of the bulletin board frequency time would be tied up on large text file transfers when someone logged into a bulletin board and then started downloading all of that week's bulletins. APRS, on the other hand, remember, it's a very short, fast kind of tactical information passing. And so there will never be any bulk file transfers happening on APRS. And so having more than one frequency would just divide people up. Right. Remember that the objective here is we want to be able to drop out of the sky, listen to APRS for 10 minutes and know everything's going on. Yeah. And so it's really the value to APRS is that it is this one frequency everywhere. And so there are some other tactical information systems other than APRS that use more than one frequency. I mean, a good example of that is the AIS system that boats use. So if you want to look into it, feel free to go read the AIS spec. It's a great read. I've done it, but that's mainly just because I'm a nerd. But APRS just uses the one frequency, mainly just because that's the one that we all agreed on. And unlike other systems like AIS, APRS trackers tend not to be frequency agile. So it's not like it could switch back and forth between different frequencies dynamically. So it's just because that's how the system grew up.
Makes sense to me. All right. Appreciate you guys, Pongo and Jeff as well.
Hi, Dan, KB6NU here. Whether you're studying for your tech license or looking to upgrade to general or extra, you should check out my no-nonsense amateur radio license study guides. Written in my easy-to-understand, no-nonsense style, they really are the easiest way to learn what you need to know to pass the test. And they are always up to date. The PDF version of the Technician Class Study Guide is free on my website at kb6nu.com/podcast. And all my study guides are available in print, PDF, Kindle, and EPUB versions. Let me help you have more fun with ham radio. Go to kb6nu.com/podcast and get started today.
KB7VML 73,
KC5HWB 73,
KD5AT 73,
KF5WUF 73,
KF7AXB 73,
KG5IWL 73.
All right, so between questions, we do our best here on the show not to mispronounce anybody's name, even George's, although I still struggle there. John Leonardelli. I didn't say that right. How did you say it?
Leonardelli?
Leonard, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, John.
And I recognize John's name, I think from Facebook maybe and Twitter. Well, he's from Twitter here, so maybe that's how I recognize it. John asked a great question, and I hear people talking about this on and off on Twitter because I follow a lot of the AMSAT guys there. But this is a great question, I think. How do you digipeat through the International Space Station?
Right. How cool is that the International Space Station has an APRS digipeater on it?
Yeah. I don't have APRS working, but the International Space Station does.
Well,
awesome.
kind of, because their VHF radio died.
That's true.
Right. So on the International Space Station, there is an APRS digipeater. I believe the call sign for the International Space Station they use is ARISS, right? So Alpha Romeo India Sierra Sierra, which I think stands for Amateur Radio on the ISS.
Okay.
Typically what they are on is the APRS satellite constellation frequency, because there's actually a constellation of APRS satellites. So normally it's on 145.825 megahertz, as with a few other APRS satellites. And again, this is one of these parts of APRS that I don't try and keep up with which satellites are functional these days and which ones are not.
Right.
So normally you would just get on 145.825. You would set up your tracker to beacon with a path of ARISS, right, instead of wide 2-1 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would beacon your packet. Presumably you would have like a Yagi antenna, and you would have looked up the kind of the best passes of the International Space Station so you can make sure that you can actually see it. And then you would just beacon it out there. It would bounce off the International Space Station, and other people would see it. And so someone else then might actually try and trade a message back with you, right? So you can have a APRS QSO through the International Space Station.
It's pretty sweet, man.
Yeah, super neat. I believe it also responds to the digipeater alias for all of the APRS satellites, which I think is APRSAT, APRSAT.
Okay.
Right. So I think if you use that alias, you will not only bounce off the International Space Station, but other satellites as well. That being said, the SpaceX Falcon launch, a few weeks ago at this point, did deliver a new VHF radio. And so I don't know what the current status of that getting installed and when they're going to switch over back to this VHF frequency. I think right now the International Space Station's on a UHF frequency, which as best I can gather from the dozen different websites that present themselves as a definitive source on APRS on the IS, I think it's on 437.550.
Okay. And we'll try to find some of those shows to link in our show notes, or those sites to link in our show notes for you guys if you're interested in that, to learn more. And the funny thing about it is, last week I was at the Kennedy Space Center and that never even crossed my mind. So Sorry, I should have done better. It's okay.
Yeah, but yeah, and it's one of these things where it will always change, and so you just kind of plug into the right mailing lists and Facebook groups, and you'll probably be able to find out what's going on.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, and John, sorry about the name, but we really appreciate you listening and sending your question in. All right, so we got another question here through email from Eric, who we both spend time with on Twitter. His call is Victor Echo 3 Echo Alpha Lima, and this email was from Eric, and it says, in the fall, when I was closing up our summer cabin for the winter, it occurred to me that there might be a way to use APRS to monitor the cabin over the winter. The cabin has no internet or phone, so an alarm system is out of the question and probably overkill. He had a thought to use an Arduino and some sort of sensors to have APRS system beacon when the sensors were in normal or trip status. There is an APRS digipeater about 10 miles away, so getting a signal wouldn't be a problem. And he says he assumes that he could run some Arduino-based weather station setups. I've seen and just replaced the temp weather type sensors for the monitoring systems that he'd like to use. So that's a pretty sweet idea. Is that something that's feasible for APRS?
Absolutely. Right. APRS is not just limited to vehicle tracking, and this sort of application where you're monitoring other sorts of systems with it is definitely within the scope of what APRS was desired to do. The weather station idea is on the right path, and it's a little bit unlikely that you'll be able to find something off the shelf that will do everything that he wants to do here.
Right.
But APRS has, of course, this weather station setup, which if you were to hook up other sensors to it would probably get pretty confusing for other people seeing these weather reports saying that the current wind direction is, not wet. Right. And so, so that may not be a great thing to do unless he's setting up a weather station to use that packet format, but there is a telemetry packet format, right? Okay. APRS has a telemetry system that supports 5 analog values. So it would be like the temperature in the room, the voltage on his battery bus, things like that, and 8 binary values of like the flood sensor is going off, the door is open, I have detected motion, that sort of thing. Those sorts of telemetry is supported. And so he could set up some sort of Arduino or controller or a Raspberry Pi sort of thing that takes in all these sensors and assembles a telemetry packet and puts it out periodically just to give him some information and state on the cabin. I would say that really the only caveat on that would be you need to be, there's stuff if you're really only using that for saving yourself the cost of an alarm system, that kind of doesn't go with the spirit of amateur radio. But if you're doing it mainly as neat, kind of a neat science experiment and expanding the art sort of, I guess he's not even U.S., but kind of the amateur radio, learning about radio sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that would definitely be the sort of thing that you could do with it. Yeah.
It sounds to me like an excellent Workbench topic for the the Workbench guys to develop something like that out. Yeah.
Exactly. So as long as he writes an article about it and posts it on Twitter, like it's totally fine.
That's a great question. And, to me, thinking down that direction, in his case, in this cabin that he's got, there's no, nothing there. There's no phone, no internet connection. It's, his only connection back to the property. And I like the idea. I do. I think that's a great question, Eric. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. The next one we have here is from Jim, and also Redditor. His call is Victor Echo 5, Echo India Sugar. It says, do people run mobile eye gates? Is there anything a person should know before building a mobile eye gate?
Yeah, and so this comes up every once in a while, and so what he's thinking about doing is setting up an iGate like you would in your house, but instead of using your house's internet connection, installing it in his car and having it tethered off of his cell phone.
Okay.
And a lot of people now are actually tethering them off of their cars because a bunch of cars now come with hotspots in them.
Right.
And with internet gate, and this is one of these things where, again, there's all sorts of debate. There's lots of different opinions on it. Internet gateways, mobile like this, I don't think is a big problem. I think it's one of these things where I don't think it will cause any problems for anyone. It will be a little bit confusing because afterwards, if other people are looking at their logs to see where they got iGated from, it's going to show that they're iGated by some RV that's now 2 states over, and that's going to be kind of strange.
Right.
This debate happens a lot for digipeaters, is people are very adamant that you do not want digipeaters on vehicles. iGates, it's less important, but I'm kind of the opinion, if you're going to go through all this effort of building the hardware for an internet gateway and get it working, why only put it in your car? Because your car is only 6 feet off the ground. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to build all this iGate hardware, I would instead encourage you to go find a 40-foot tower somewhere or go find a mountaintop and put it there, because it's then useful for everyone over a bigger distance than only the 5 or 10% of the time that you're driving your vehicle, only for the people within a few miles of you. And so it's not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. It's not the first iGate I would set up.
Okay, so instead of that, let's just say that he drives a lot and he's stuck in traffic. It'd be better to find someone that lives beside the interstate highway that maybe has some elevation that would share some internet with you and put it there.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Because then it's the same hardware cost, but it's useful the other 95% of the time.
I got you. I like that answer. Thanks, Jim. We appreciate that as well. Very good. All right, you guys will recognize the next call sign here. This was also from Reddit, and it's Sterling Coffee. His call is November 0 Sierra Charlie. It's one of the only zero calls I can say and not mess up usually. It's probably because I know Sterling. We've had him on the show. Familiar with his call, maybe. So those other ones that kill me. All right, Sterling sent us a list, and it's quite a list, but we're going to go through them here. And Sterling, thank you for this message and these questions. What is the next generation of APRS? What do we say, Kenneth?
The next generation of APRS is something that hasn't come up yet, right? And it's one of these tough things where a lot of people will come in and say APRS is ridiculous. It's only 1,200 baud. We're using 30-year-old technology. We should come up with something better. And it's one of those things that you will get a very negative response on the mailing list when you come in with an attitude like that. And so most of these guys are a real flash in the pan. They work on it for a few months. They'll set up a GitHub. They'll maybe get 2 or 3 other people working on it, and then it'll disappear. And so what the next generation of APRS is I don't know. It's going to be pretty amazing, whatever it is, if you can manage to convince the 30 to I don't even know what the number of APRS nodes are these days, but it's something in like the tens of thousands.
Wow. And
so APRS has gotten a long time to really grow in. And so the next generation of APRS is going to be something very different.
Okay. He says, how can we come closer to a system like the ADS-B airplane tracking?
And yeah, so ADS-B, like just as AIS is for boats, ADS-B is for planes, and both of them are really good tracking systems. Mm-hmm. But the problem is they have a couple significant advantages over APRS. They are centrally controlled, right? And so like every airplane is required to spend the money to install an ADS-B system correctly.
Yes, mandated. It's law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And that's fantastic. I wish that we could mandate by law that all the Digipeater guys have to fix their settings on APRS, but it's not happening. And the scope and the objectives for ADS-B is much, much smaller than APRS, right? APRS is trying to be this universal tactical information system. Mm-hmm. ADS-B only tells you where they are and what their heading is and where they're going.
Okay.
And so ADS-B has some very impressive performance, but because its scope and what they're trying to achieve is very well defined. And so a lot of APRS's shortcomings versus something like that kind of comes down to the fact that it's just an earlier system, it's a simpler system, and it's trying to do a lot more.
Okay. He asked here, number 2 question is, how is APRS developed?
And is it developed? Yeah, so back in the late 90s and real early 2000s, there was an APRS working group formally existing, and they had I think most of their meetings were centralized around the Digital Communications Conference that Tapper and ARRL puts on, which is a great conference. If you're interested in packet radio or software-defined radio, I presented a chapter of my thesis at the Digital Communications Conference, and it's a bunch of great guys. But as for, so they managed to put out the APRS 1.0 spec, which is like a 100-page PDF or something. They put that out, and then as far as I can tell, that whole working group kind of disassembled, and it has at this point just been a whole bunch of guys on a mailing list debating about it and posting stuff up in various places, right? And so that's how APRS ends up being so confusing a decade and a half later.
Right.
And so how is it developed? It's a bunch of guys on the mailing list. Is it developed? I'm still on the fence.
It's developing.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, number 3, where does APRS fall flat?
And this is a tough question, right? Because there's a dozen different places that APRS could be better. If I were to say one thing, I would say APRS falls flat on its documentation. The second place that APRS falls flat is really actually behaving the same everywhere. a lot of that is because there's different APRS spans a whole bunch of different beasts, right? You compare somewhere like California, where we've got 6,000-foot mountaintops, to pretty much anywhere else where you don't have 6,000-foot mountaintops, and it's functionally just a different animal there. And so when you try and APRS kind of falls flat in trying to be the same thing in these wildly different areas, where I think APRS needs to be a little bit more flexible and forgiving about what the local network topology looks like than it does.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. What about what is the architecture of APRS.is?
Yeah, so this is the APRS Internet System.
Okay.
The APRS IS started as what was called the core servers, and so it was. I think that group is up to about 9 servers now. So it's 9 servers that exist on the internet, and your internet gateways or your internet connected clients would connect to one of those. And those 9 servers are kind of in this mesh so that they all send all the packets to each other and trade them so that they all have this, full unified view of what all the APRS IS traffic looks like. I think there was political problems, or there was like a technical issue or something with that. And so there was in this second set of servers called the Tier 2 servers that were set up. The Tier 2 servers have 5 hub servers, again in a dense mesh, and then about 75 Tier 2 servers hanging off of them. So at this point, the topology of the APRS IS system looks like at the top, you've got these 5 hub servers that are all meshed together. And hanging off of them that your iGate can connect to is the 9 core servers and about 50 or 75 of these Tier 2 servers. And the Tier 2 networks on APRS2.net, and they offer a couple different DNS names that will just give you one of the servers. And so when you're setting up your iGate, if you put rotate.aprs2.net, that'll just kind of give you any one of the 50 or 75 available servers.
That makes sense, even to me.
Oh, well, I know I'm doing good then.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've talked about this a couple of times, but let's address it again real quickly. What are the uses of APRS that aren't explicitly GPS tracking?
Message passing, telemetry, weather, local objects like repeaters, frequencies, the list goes on.
Yeah. All right, I love this question because I type like this sometimes too, Sterling, so it's okay. It's not just a millennial thing. Why, period, do, period, all, period, APRS, period, websites, period, suck, question mark. I have been asking that question for years, and where's the documentation? So why do all APRS websites suck, and where's the documentation?
And that just kind of comes back to there is no central authority on APRS.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of it is there's been several generations of people put up websites. They'll put a lot of effort into it for a while, and then other people come in and go, well, that's not really right, and I'm going to go set up my own thing. And so it's just that it has been around for 30 years, and most amateurs just aren't good at setting up documentation and online presences.
Which is evident when you look at different club sites. Not everybody's as bad, but most of them are. No offense, guys.
Right.
Sorry. It's the truth.
Yeah.
If your site looks bad, you should hire somebody, pay them $500 and make it look pretty.
Yeah, because websites are hard.
Yeah. All right. And he mentions your master thesis, which is a master's thesis, by the way. He says, can't we just put this all on GitHub?
We could, but I think a lot of the issue here is that there are parts of APRS, like there are a lot of the gritty details that a lot of us developers have just agreed to disagree on. Mm-hmm. And so, like, sure, if we were to go start pounding this stuff out and set up a GitHub, you could get one guy's perspective on it, and it would make a lot of other people very unhappy.
And it would be, turn into another wall of text and arguing.
Yeah, right. And then so they would go off and they would fork it, and so then you'd have 2 GitHubs, 2 Git repositories on GitHub that didn't agree with each other. So it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it is. And it's a great question, Sterling, because when I was trying to get started in this thing before I found Kenneth, man, I would find these websites and I'd spend hours reading them. I'd print stuff off. And thankfully, I don't have any hair because I wouldn't have any left from pulling it out trying to read these things, you know? I mean, really, I was on YouTube. I was everywhere, and I had friends, Andy, KK4UCG, and he was trying to do some APRS, and we're like, why isn't there just someone that can help us? Because when you post in certain forums or if you're on certain mailing lists and you ask the most simplest question, you know, you're like, oh, you must be a no-code ham, so you don't know what you're talking about. It's just an attitude. And I'm like, where is the help for this? And Kenneth, I'm just going to say again, thank you for being here to share some help with us, because there are a lot of people that have the same questions, and I'm sure they have the same frustrations as I do and as Sterling does, as he mentioned.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And yeah, APRS is fantastic. Everyone should use it. It's great.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so good that somebody wrote a master's thesis on it. All right, his point number 7 here is you should check out Faraday RF for a thingy that begins to address the issues.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard of it, the Faraday RF is kind of a neat open source transceiver board that comes from the Salmi brothers. I've talked to them a little bit over the years as they've been developing this thing, and I think it's a 900 megahertz digital radio. And so it's a single board solution. I think it's got some sort of microcontroller on it. It's got a 900 megahertz radio. I think it's about half a watt, but it can do all sorts of. It's got a lot more processing power than terminal node controllers and APRS, and you're talking about data rates several orders of magnitude higher than APRS. So there's a lot of really neat advantages to it. But at the same time, the Faraday RF is not a replacement for APRS, right? The Faraday RF is essentially the equivalent of one of our terminal node controllers that the firmware hasn't been developed for yet. And so whoever is interested in going and developing the next generation of APRS, the Faraday RF would probably be a really interesting platform to start on, but I don't think it really addresses any of the issues yet so much as gives you the tools to fix them.
Okay. So it goes back to that question, what is the future of? There's some potential there for that, but it's, again, you've got thousands of hams with, old ICOM rigs running 144.3.0, and
right,
they're just happy and with the wrong settings, and they're happy doing it.
Yeah, and I don't want to call it APRS 2.0, but whatever comes after APRS, remember, you got to improve every metric by an order of magnitude compared to APRS.
Right.
And so it's going to be a very tough problem, whatever it ends up being, to really make a compelling network that other people are going to be excited about getting on.
Yeah. Well, very good question. Thank you, Sterling. It's always good to hear from you, man, and we appreciate your questions.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to count one week just how many times I see the question posted on the internet, which dual band radio should I buy for my car? Because the answer from me is always the same. The Kenwood TMV71A is my personal choice for a dual band cross banding rig for my truck, my van, my home. If I could afford it, I'd have it everywhere. Matter of fact, I'm looking to get another one pretty soon. So if you are looking for a dual band cross banding mobile to put in your car, your truck, or even your shack, make sure you check out mtcradio.com, type in TMV71 Alpha in the search bar, and you'll find exactly what I'm talking about. Remember, Kenwood at mtcradio.com.
KG6 OVR 73.
KJ4 Fox Echo Lima 73.
CQ. This is Kilo 4 Alpha Mike Papa calling CQ.
KK6 RHY 73s.
KM4 GIG 73.
We have some more questions here from another Redditor. Adam, Kilo Bravo 3 Zulu Uniform Victor. Thanks, man, for sitting here with us and going through your questions. Adam asks, is there any concept of etiquette when sending out beacons? He says he likes to set his to send out every 30 seconds because he's on a 5-watt handy, and half of them don't get through anyway. Maybe because I'm being shouted over by beacons being sent at 50 watts. What kind of responsibilities do I have in this regard? Do I in fact have none at all, and the only reason not to send a beacon every 30 seconds is so I don't drain my battery so fast? So this is a great question, matter of fact, because the etiquette thing is always, it's an opinion, and I'm sure that everybody has one. But from your developing side, tell us a little bit about etiquette for APRS and beaconing.
Yeah, so setting what we're talking about here is we're talking about beacon rates, and the problem is that APRS is only a 1200 bit per second packet channel, and it's a shared common good, right? And so this is the tragedy of the commons sort of economic game theory thing going on here, because the more that you beacon, the more likely your packets are going to get out at the detriment to everyone else, right? And so it is very tempting, and I see this a lot, where people set their beacon rate to every 30 seconds, right? But let's go back and think about what is the objective of APRS. APRS has this defined cycle size of 10 minutes for mobile trackers and people, and then 30 minutes for infrastructure, right? And so the concept is that if you listen to the channel for 10 minutes, you'll know about all the other people around you. And if you listen to the channel for 30 minutes, you'll generally get a good idea of what else is around you. What are the digipeaters? Where are the iGates? Where are the repeaters? Where are the supply caches and aid stations? Stuff like that.
Right.
And so if you're going to beacon more often every 10 minutes, you need to think about what in this second beacon is important enough to update and replace my first beacon, right? If someone's been listening to you for the last 10 minutes and they got one of your packets in the last 10 minutes, what are you sending now that is important and new, right? And so when I'm, if I'm just sitting, so like if I set up a tracker and I have it only on a fixed interval, and he's absolutely right, you will not all of your packets will get through.
Yeah. And
so kind of my rule of thumb for a tracker in my pickup is if I'm setting a fixed interval, I'll just set it at 5 minutes, right? I figure maybe they get my first packet, maybe they don't. If they don't, they get the second one, and every 10 minutes they get an idea of where I am.
Right. Okay.
Right. For infrastructure stuff like a digipeater or an iGate, I will typically have those beacon every 15 minutes, right? Because then over the 30-minute span, you get maybe one, maybe two, with the one caveat that doesn't work if you're using a tactical call sign for the digipeater, right? Because I kind of there is that question of identification, right? How are you identifying your digipeater? And I always make the argument that when you digipete a different packet and you append your call sign to the end of it, you are identifying that transmission as having come from you. But if you're using a tactical call sign on your digipeater, that last call sign that you're appending isn't your FCC call sign.
Okay.
Right? See, I'm kind of throwing some wrenches in this question here. So on those, I'll have them beacon every 10 minutes to meet the FCC requirements.
Okay.
And so the simple answer is on trackers for my mobile units, I'll use every 5 minutes intervals. On fixed infrastructure, I'll use 10 or 15-minute intervals, which we'll talk about proportional pathing later in the show. But the problem with that is a lot of people want to be updated more often than every 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes is kind of a long and boring time. And so this is where if you're really interested in learning more than you ever wanted to know about beacon intervals, I recommend you go back and read my master's thesis. I did a whole chapter on just this question. And there's this algorithm called smart beaconing, which dynamically changes your beacon interval between about 30 seconds and 10 minutes based on how fast you're going and based on if you're turning a corner, right? And so you'll notice the low end is 30 seconds, right? But it's this algorithm is smart enough that it only sends a beacon every 30 seconds when there's a new and important update to send out about like your heading has significantly changed. And so if you're interested in being able to beacon that fast but not overload the network when you're sitting in a parking lot, smart beaconing is a great feature that is available in a lot of the APRS tracker hardware.
Yeah, I've seen it in APRS Droid. That's one of the choices. So I mean that's my experience with it. Just kind of play off that first question. I can see maybe sending when you're first trying to get your unit set up maybe and you're testing here in your shack and maybe you're not wanting to wait 5 minutes to get another beacon sent to see if it's doing what it's supposed to doing possibly. But past that, I mean, it goes back to the word etiquette, and it's, hey, we're all standing on each other's shoulders trying to get in here. Let's be responsible. I guess is maybe a good word, which nobody likes to use.
Yeah, sure. And if anyone in the South Bay who really pays attention, South Bay, California, pays attention, they could probably tell you there are times when I'm doing development for APRS, when I will set it up and beacon on 15-second intervals, right? But I only do it for a few minutes while I'm testing something. When I'm doing that, when I'm kind of doing a longer development session like that, I actually have my own private APRS network set up in my apartment on a different frequency. But when I want to test stuff with other digipeaters, I will set it up on the 144.3.9, beacon at 15-second intervals for 2 minutes, and then shut it off.
I got you.
Right, and so none of these are hard, fast rules, and the beacon police won't.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense to take care of each other.
Yeah.
All right, he's got another question here, and that was a great one, Adam. Thank you for that one, by the way. What's up with 200-something different symbols for stuff on the map, and why can't I figure out what any of them mean?
Oh, here's a question near and dear to my heart. Anyone who's been on the APRS SIG mailing list for the last year has probably seen my several long rants about APRS symbols, because Bob Bernenga and I kind of fundamentally disagree on what the scope of the symbols should be. To put a precise answer on it, there is actually 3,496 symbols, which I know because I have argued about all of them. And the issue is that Bob Bernenga feels that with the potential to have 3,496 symbols, we should use all of them. But it's kind of difficult in like a 16 by 16 pixel icon to convey 3,500 different concepts. And so if you want the master index for what the APRS symbols mean, there are 2 text files on APRS.org, Bob's site, that lists all of the meanings for the symbols. The first one is symbolsx.txt, which we'll link to in the show notes. And the second one is symbols-new.txt. The symbols new is not replacing symbols x, but is an addition to symbols x, which replaced symbols.txt. So, yeah, it's a little bit confusing.
Oh, Lord bless them.
Right. But so, essentially it comes down to symbols come in three categories. You've got your primary table symbols, which have a / and then some symbol code. And that's just 92 or 94 different symbols that have icons. There's then your secondary symbols, which are a / and then some symbol code, and that's another 92 or whatever it is. And then there's these overlays. And the overlays is what I argue about constantly, because the overlays are a letter or number on top of the secondary symbols. And so we use that a lot for digipeters, right? Because if you have a fill-in digipeter, it'll be a green star with a 1 on it to show that it's the first hop, where wides or the high-level ones are a green star with a D on it for digipeter, right? But then Bob wants to come in and define what the other 34 characters mean for different digipeter types. And I argue no one's going to remember what 36 different letters mean for the different digipeters. And so this is something I debate about a lot. And the best answer here is, look up, pull up those 2 text files that Bob has, because that is still kind of the most definitive source for the meaning of this alphabet soup. But if you're confused, know that I am fighting the good fight to try and fix that.
Yeah. Well, the chart that you shared with us the last time you were on, that was enough to kind of overwhelm me and still make sense at the same time. So that was the / and the /. Am I correct there?
Oh, yeah. I totally forgot about that symbol. Yeah, so that icon set table that I made. So that's the primary table and the secondary table. And so so that kind of gives you the different icons. And the concept for the overlays was originally that you would have different artwork for these overlays, but no one's both artistic enough and willing to make that many different icons.
Right.
And so typically on if you look on APRS.fi, that's actually the icon set that I used, And so it's one of those characters with the letter on top of it. So yeah, if you're much more of the visual type instead of the wanting to read a very dense text file, that table that I made was for people like you to be able to just kind of look through it and pick out the icon that you want to show up on the map.
Yeah, if you want a green and yellow tractor, they got them. Schoolhouses, it's there. Tornadoes. Right. Wow, I need to write that down. I got to ask you a question about that later. So that all makes sense, and it's almost like a vanity call to an extent, because it's a little. You don't have to go there. You can just identify yourself for what you are. But, if a guy's got an APRS tracker and he's out, cutting, acres and acres and hundreds of acres of wheat or grain or whatever, and his tractor, why not put it on there with a tractor? It'd be pretty interesting to watch. So
right. Because there's not that big of a tactical difference between a sedan or a Jeep or a pickup, right?
Yeah,
but it's cute.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe fire trucks. I don't know. Okay, so thank you, Adam. And if we can, I'm going to go to Ian's question here. His call is Kilo 6 India Bravo X-Ray. And he says, what is the APRS Local Frequency Information Initiative, and how does it work in practice when you are in front of a radio?
Yeah, so remember, this was kind of a big initiative that Bob's started pushing in the late 2000s, and it really comes down to not only do we want to know where the local, where the other people are on APRS, but we want to know where the local frequencies are. Mm-hmm. And so there is this defined format, which is poorly documented, of course, for how do you mark up a frequency in an APRS packet. And so that modern radios from like Yaesu and Kenwood, when they receive these packets, you can actually press a little QSY button and it'll flip you over to that frequency.
Which is a great idea.
Right? It's super cool. And I think some of the newer radios, I think they will actually, in your status comment on your beacons, insert the frequency that you're listening on the other side of the radio. And so as you're showing up on the map, tooling along in your Jeep or your tractor, it'll include the frequency that you happen to be on for your voice side of the radio. And so someone else will, on their radio, receive your beacon. Their radio will parse the frequency markup and go, this guy is on this other frequency, be it a simplex or a repeater or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then they can just press the QSY button, switch over to the same frequency as you, and give you a call.
That's tremendous. I mean, that is one of the coolest things that I don't have access to, but it's really an awesome idea. Is it feasible and is it happening?
That's a mixed bag, right? Some places are really good about it.
Okay, Silicon Valley, California, more than likely.
I don't know, right? Okay. I don't see that many frequency objects around here. Okay, but and that really kind of comes down to the priorities of the local APRS working group, right? Okay. Because the concept is, as a repeater trustee, some repeater trustees will go, I really want my repeater to show up as an object on APRS and be beaconed. And so they will need to find a local digipeater or iGate or something to beacon out an object for their repeater every 15 minutes with their frequency spec in it. And then, at that point, locally, other people driving by, that repeater will show up and they can just click QSY. If that's not a priority for the repeater trustee, it just kind of will never happen.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Before we move on, Eddie had a question here as well. And his call is Kilo 8 Victor Zulu. This is from Facebook, by the way. Thanks, Eddie. He also asked about the object beacons, which are used for the frequency information system. So what beacon symbols do we use there?
Yeah, so object beacons, and kind of generally, because I've only been talking about them as repeaters, but in an abstract sense, objects are anything that isn't an APRS node that you want to show up on a map. And so if you want to, as a digipeater, make a repeater show up somewhere else on the map, you would beacon it as a repeater object with a repeater symbol and some name for the object, which there's disagreement on what the name should be. I like to set up my repeater objects as like the call sign /R. people like Bob Bernenga argue that it should be the frequency of the repeater with some gibberish at the end to make it a unique object name, since you can't have every repeater on the same repeater pair in the world have the same object name. And which I kind of argue against the frequencies as the name, because you then immediately put the frequency after the name in the object comment. So repeaters are one thing. If you I know a lot of people will actually beacon objects for like a accident or a major traffic jam. Mm-hmm. They'll put objects for that. Storm watchers and like the weather guys will actually drop objects for tornadoes or thunderclouds, things like that.
And that was my question. That's what spawned it a moment ago. Was I saw some screenshots of some APRS just a week or so ago when the tornadoes were happening in the Midwest. It's that time of year again, of course, and they had the tornado, the little icon tornado there, and they even had. I guess it was like a future track of where they anticipated it going. I'd never seen APRS used like that before, and it was quite stunning, actually.
Yeah, because I believe that you can do this in objects as well, but you can give it but I'm not sure, but I think you can give it a heading and direction.
Oh, okay.
Right, and so then when that packet's received on the receivers, they can then do dead reckoning on it and continue to update the location of that object until you beacon it again, 5 or 10 minutes later.
Right. That was really cool. Right. I was like, whoa, I've never seen that before, but I like it.
Yeah, right. And so in an event support concept, you could drop objects. You could put out objects for where the rest stations are. You could put out objects for where the medical calls are coming from. And so when your rover is out there trying to find the downed bicyclist, if you have a good location for where the bike is down, which we almost never do, but we can hope, mm-hmm. You could then beacon an object with the bicyclist's location, and the rover would then get headings to that object on their local radio.
Nice.
Right.
This is 30-year-old technology that's still so very relevant and so cool. Just, you guys may not like this. I love this. For some reason, this is like the little bug that bites me all the time. I like this a lot. Yeah, so I had no idea you could do that. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to come right back. We've got Kenneth Finnegan with us, and he is continuing to answer our APRS questions. This is show number 2, and man, we are still learning. Back in a sec. Coming up on the last segment of episode number 73, Ham Radio 360 podcast. Thank you so much for staying with us throughout this show. Hope you're learning along with me, of course. Hey, this weekend I got a call, says, Kel, you need to check out TexasDigitalRadio.com. So I did, and what did I find? Full power base and mobile radios for DMR, UHF, and VHF. Full power, optional Bluetooth, optional GPS, and more. You can find it online, TexasDigitalRadio.com, or visit MTC Radio to get yours ordered today.
KM4 SUA 73.
73 from KR7RK.
This is November 3, Mike Delta Golf, sending 73.
N3 VEM 73.
N4MN November 4, Mike November 73.
N4 TFN 73.
November 6, Mike Romeo Whiskey 73.
NN7X 73.
Back with Kenneth, and we're going to talk about the K4's CDN Digipeater. This is something that, I kind of considered and was like, that'd be cool, but how? And then Kenneth said, hey, man, you put a dual band antenna up at your repeater site, which is up and running now, by the way, and working pretty well. Why not use the VHF side of that antenna with a duplexer to do a Digipeater iGate? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that'd be cool. I didn't think about that. So I don't think I was the only one that didn't think about it, because I heard some chatter about it after we had the conversation on the last show. And we're kind of in the process. Actually, Kenneth's doing all the work, but Kenneth is in the process of helping me get an iGate, Digipeater, whatever we're going to call it there, for the K4 CDN repeater site. So, Kenneth, it was a conversation that just kind of came out of the blue the last time we talked. And the repeater's up and running, the coax is there, the duplexer's there. All I need now is just to get a 2-meter rig of some sort and the Raspberry Pi thing. So what are we doing on your end, the smart guys end of this project?
Yeah, well, so let's first correct you a little bit for the 4 guys at home that are angrily writing an email right now. In the amateur world, we typically refer to it when it's a crossband combiner. It's a diplexer.
Diplexer, yes.
Right.
I'm dyslexic, so you guys got to just cut me some slack. Diplexer, duplexer.
That being said, that diplexer duplexer distinction, as far as I can tell, is very much just an amateur radio thing. As I had a very confusing interview with Space Systems L'Oreal once, where I was interviewing for a position, and they apparently reverse it in satellite communications or something, or it's slightly different. So for the 4 of you out there, yes, it's a diplexer. For the rest of you, it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, so the K4 CDN-5 digipeater. And so on the objective side here, what we're kind of thinking about doing is we want to set up a digipeater and an internet gateway, because at the repeater site you've got internet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct.
Right. And so since it's going to be kind of one of the first digipeaters in your county, since your county has no APRS, it's going to be both a digipeater and then also an internet gateway. This is a perfect application for the software that I'm the developer for, APRX, right? Alpha Papa Romeo X-ray. And all that APRX needs is a radio with a terminal node controller or a modem somehow, and then it needs to run on some system running Linux. The easiest and cheapest, well, maybe not the easiest, but the cheapest option for getting a computer that's low power and running Linux is, of course, the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi is not the most ideal, fantastic option for a digipeater, but in this case, since it's going to be your first digipeater and it's not on the top of the 6,000-foot mountaintop, the Raspberry Pi is kind of an acceptable solution, right? And I get this question a lot about, well, what's my problem with the Raspberry Pi? And it mostly comes down to it runs off of 5 volts, right? So you need some sort of voltage regulator hanging out in there. It runs off an SD card, which tends to roll over and die more than a traditional hard drive. And it's not a full computer, right? It's a single board computer. So you're going to need a real-time clock on it somehow. You're going to need a enclosure to make it an actual case, right? So those are the problems that you need to grapple with. But thankfully, Kale's got me, and so I'm taking care of most of these problems for him.
I'm smiling real big right now. Thank you.
Right. And so what happened was I went and had Kale buy a Raspberry Pi, the nicest SD card we could find on Amazon, a enclosure for it. My favorite Raspberry Pi enclosure is the Flirk case, and then a real-time clock hat. And so the real-time clock hat is just a little board that sits on the Raspberry Pi. It plugs into pin 1 through 9. And it has a little battery on it and a little chip that keeps track of what the current time is. And then at that point, it's all just software, right? Which is simple, right? Right, Cal?
Sure. That's when you have friends like Kenneth. Everything's simple.
So on the Raspberry Pi, I installed Raspbian, which is a Linux. It's a derivative distribution of Debian Linux. And so we've got a Linux system running on it. I configure it to use the real-time clock hat instead of no clock at all, because when a Raspberry Pi turns on, it doesn't know what time it is. It assumes that it's January 1970 because it had no way to remember what time it was when it last turned off. And so this is fine when it's in your apartment or it's only an internet gateway, but if the repeater site were to lose power and lose internet and then regain power but not internet, your digipeater wouldn't know what time it is. And I think you'd probably would want your digipeater to keep working even though it doesn't have internet. And so that's why we need this real-time clock chip on it. On the APRS side, what we're looking at is I installed APRX on the Raspberry Pi. You can download the precompiled binaries from my website, thelifeofkenneth.com/APRX, which we'll link to. Or what I typically do, since I'm real lazy at releasing new versions of it, is I'll go to the GitHub repository, download the most recent version, and compile it myself because it's real easy and I have instructions in the distribution. So I install APRS, and what it does then is it puts this text file in the etc. folder of Linux. Anyone who's familiar with Linux, the etc. folder is where you have all of these settings for applications like APRS. So it's a single file where I then go walk through it, and I'll be giving this file to Cale so that he doesn't need to deal with it to get started. I just set up, this is my call sign, this is the GPS location. I want to be an internet gateway. I want to be a digipeater with these kind of, minutia settings. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we've got a digipeater. We need to hook it up to a radio. Right. And this is where there's 1,000 different options for different APRS terminal node controllers and radios, or you can do commercial radios and sound card modems. And this is there's 1,000 different options here, and it's one of those big things that it's mostly predicated by what you have laying around, right? Okay. And so if you happen to have a 2-meter radio and or a terminal node controller laying around, fantastic. What I do myself for all of my own setups is I will use Motorola Walrus radios. These are the CDM 750s or the CDM 1250s, and I'll hook them up to Argent Data OT3M TNCs. A lot of people give me some flack for not using like a USB sound card modem. And so if you want to go the sound card route, Direwolf is a good soft modem, which saves you the expense of the terminal node controller. I don't like it because it doesn't it's not a clean hardware solution. Like, you're talking about a USB sound card with some audio cables that are kind of spaghettied back there, and you have to somehow get push to talk involved. So there's some soldering involved. The OT3M from Argent Data is this really clean deck of cards sized metal box with all rugged strain relieved connectors that I can take this whole build of Raspberry Pi, the OT3M, and a radio, bolt it all to like a rack shelf, throw it off the top of the building, and it'll bounce off the bottom and still be okay. Right.
Because everybody does that with their APRS digipeters, just in case.
It's a good litmus test to make sure your hardware is good, is go throw it off the top of the building and then install it. No, don't do that.
Sling it down the road.
Yeah, right. Not that I've ever bounced a repeater out of the back of my pickup truck. That's a story for a different time. So that's what I do. The problem with Motorola radios is that they are commercial radios that are only meant to be programmed at the radio shop. And so if you don't, again, it's one of these things like if you don't have a service monitor and you don't have the several $100s worth of hardware and software required to program a Motorola radio, that probably doesn't make much sense to you. Mm-hmm. And so I have been looking for good amateur radios to recommend for this sort of packet radio build out. And kind of the one that I've been pretty happy with is the Alinco DR135. It's under $200. It exposes all of the audio lines you want out the back as a D-sub-9 connector. And it's an amateur radio so that you can program in the frequency and save it through the front panel, right? So we're not talking about you need to get an old DOS computer and a Motorola RIB radio interface box, right? So it's much more friendly for any of you that aren't used to commercial radio programming. The awesome thing about the DR135 is that it was designed with a terminal node controller option board that you can install inside the radio.
Wow.
The one that came from Alinco is about $140, and I know almost nothing about it. But Argent Data makes a copy of their OpenTracker 3 in the same profile that you can then open up the radio, drop the Argent Data OT3 135 into this radio, and you've suddenly gotten the terminal node controller inside the radio.
So you've taken a piece of hardware off the shelf and put it inside the rig.
Right. And if we were only setting up a standalone digipeater and we didn't want the iGate functionality, mm-hmm. that radio is literally all we would have. Right.
Oh,
we
really?
wouldn't need the Raspberry Pi. Yeah. Right. If you were happy with it just being a digipeater and didn't need an internet gateway feature to it, it's that radio, apply power, apply antenna, and the digipeater lives inside the radio.
No, but let me just pause you there before I'm going to screw this up, but I'm going to ask it anyway. At that point, can I come out of that pinout somehow and see what I'm hearing?
So when you install the OT3 135, it kind of shims between the radio motherboard and the D sub on the back.
Mm-hmm.
So the D sub on the back is no longer your receive and transmit audio connections, but is an RS-232 serial port.
All right.
Right. And so since we want iGate, that's what we're sending to our Raspberry Pi.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to still listen to what the packet belches sound like, you can just turn the volume up on the front.
Okay.
Right. And so like the radio is still fully functional, and through the front panel you can actually turn on and off this TNC so that it's only used on some memory channels and not others. Right. So it's a super clean setup in general for digipeters or trackers in your car. And in this case, since we want an iGate, the main thing is it just takes one extra box off of the shelf.
Yeah.
So the final install for yours, if we go this route, is a Linko 135 with the OT3 135 installed inside the radio, and then a USB cable or a serial cable going from this radio setup to the Raspberry Pi. The OT3 has also, can support built-in digipeater function, right? Which is how you could do it as just a standalone digipeater.
Mm-hmm.
It supports, standalone tracker features where you could plug a GPS puck into the serial port on the back and do that. But we're just going to set it up as just a modem. And so all it's going to do is handle audio encoding and decoding and kick it out the back on the serial port as a KISS data stream, which is the standard interchange between desktop and computer software and these terminal node controllers for packets. So we'll install the modem board. We will do the deviation alignment. We'll then configure the OT3 as a KISS modem, and we will never touch it again.
And all we have to do on the other side is just plug a network cable into the router at the fire station to the Raspberry Pi.
Yep. And so you'll have a Ethernet cable coming down to the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi will be running APRS, which will in the config file for that will say, all right, this KISS modem is on this serial port at this baud rate, and that'll be talking to the radio. And then the radio will have its antenna plugged into the diplexer and be sending and receiving all your packet radios. And that's a digipeater.
Wow. That's crazy, right? Man. That is crazy.
Right.
So, and so the Alinco rig is the choice, should be the choice for the amateur right now.
Yeah. And I finally have bought one recently and started playing with it. It came at the recommendation of several people, one of which I was talking to one of the other guys on one of the APRS chat rooms, and he said that he has bought 36 of these and deployed them.
My God.
Right. And so I feel pretty good with the 3 or 4 digipeters I've built out in my life. And he's like, yeah, I've spun up about 36 digipeters. I'm like, holy, right. Right. And so at this point we've got Kale a functional digipeater with internet gateway capabilities and RF gateway capabilities to route messages to and from, right? And so all of a sudden now, anyone within range of this fire station or within of a digipeater hop of this fire station now shows up all the time on APRS FI, gets digipeated through this fire station tower, and when they send a message to someone outside the local range, that person on the other end can actually reply to them, and it'll get gatewayed back out through this station.
Which goes back to almost question number 1, question number 2 of this whole conversation.
Right.
We just saw it in real life right there.
Yeah. So suddenly we've solved the problem.
Wow.
But now there's the question of, well, what about this local information initiative? Mm-hmm. Because this iGate / digipeater is sharing an antenna with a repeater. And so it would be a crime and shame if we didn't also beacon the K4 CDN repeater object and advertise what frequency it's on.
Very good.
Right.
We can do that.
Yeah. And this is one of these things that before you asked me to work on this project, I haven't really played with the frequency initiative stuff much because most of my uses for APRS are strictly tactical position reporting for events.
Right.
Right. Because at the, and in that scenario, the beginning of the weekend, I get everyone together and give them the frequency plan and where all these rest stops were. I hand them all maps So I've traditionally not needed to tell people what frequency to be on because I've already told them that. Okay. And so I had never really dug into it. And so I start digging into the frequency spec text file, which Bob Bernenga wrote and put up on his website. And I'm reading through it and trying to figure out, all right, so I got to describe, like, all right, here's the frequency and, like, here's the tone and the offset. And then I get 2/3 of the way down it, and there's these 2 sentences. For scheduled radio nets, you want to have a markup kind of like this. And he gives, like, one example of, like, how to indicate when the net is on this repeater. And I went, whoa, wait a minute. What are you talking about? You know, and so I started, I'm like, this is like, literally it was just those 2 sentences that offhandedly mention the net markup. And I'm like, well, I mean, you know, and I posted your repeater object string to the mailing list to say, all right, guys, sanity check. I want to make sure that, like, I've never done this before. Have I parsed this all correctly? And Bob comes back and goes, man, I wish more people used the net markup things. And I'm like,
the what?
But right? And several other people in the mailing list are like, we have never heard of this thing before. And so I went and sat down and it was about an hour, and I wrote up it was about a page and a half long spec on indicating when nets happen on a repeater. Right. And so it's this little short string, right? So it starts with NET, and then you put, like, the day and the time, or you can put ranges of days. And so, like, if you had, like, a 9 a.m. talk net, you could put Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. If you had a Wednesday evening one on the first week of the month, you can mark up something like that. And this had never been specified or defined anywhere.
Wow.
And so I sat down and wrote it, and I kind of threw it up on a random GitHub repository I have for these sorts of little one-off documents. But this was all just because you asked me to put together a repeater object, and I had never dug into it before.
So Sterling, that's how APRS is developed. It's my fault.
Yeah, right. It's just, some developer trips over something and is sufficiently annoyed by it enough that they go and they write a 1-page spec for it.
That is awesome, man.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
Right, and of course, I do all this work without first asking you if there is a planned scheduled net on the repeater. And of course, last I heard, there isn't.
No, not at this time. But we can make one if we need one, just to make it work in APRS. Yeah.
Right, because I mean, all of this work and then not to have a repeater, a net object on this.
Really, it's kind of funny. We're hoping one day to connect an IRLP node or something to this thing, because we have a lot of listeners who are like, "Hey, Kel, we want to get on your repeater." I'm like, well, it's good for like 8 miles. Come on, kind of a thing. So yeah, that would be that's definitely something that we're looking towards. But yeah, I mean, if we need to put a net on there, man, we'll have a net just to have a net.
Yeah, right. There's just some time that people are on and say hi. So
yeah.
But if anything else, I've at least defined it so that other people will know about it and can use it. And then I deliberately kind of made it in a way that if people follow the spec, it would conceivably even be parsable, so that you could get like automatic notifications for local nets on nearby repeaters.
That's really
right. So once you and this is kind of one of those things where, as a developer, once you clearly define this stuff and people start following it, there's all sorts of other awesome applications that start falling out of it. Right. Nice. And so I'm really excited to help get APRS up in your county, because then not only you, but other people in your county can start playing with APRS and start advancing the art.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's nothing right now, but that's changing. That's changing very rapidly. Yeah, so that is so cool, man, to know that dumb old Kel helped somebody stumble over something to change the world. How about that? Yeah, leave it to a ham radio podcast,
Yeah, I'll let it be that dramatic. Yeah, we'll just say that. Yeah, change the world.
It sounded good, didn't it?
It did.
It sounded really. I'm gonna tell my kids.
I suspect that they will be as excited as most people.
Yeah. My grandchildren. Boys, I remember back in 17. Man, I tell you, we have answered some questions and may or may not have gone long, which doesn't matter when we're learning. But, why not use this opportunity, episode 73, to really get out there and continue building on something that has befuddled me for the last 2 or 3, 4 years. So, Kenneth, we all owe you a great deal of thanks for all of your work that you and all the developers do in APRS. Appreciate everything. The local help here, the help on the show, answering these guys' questions. Man, I can almost imagine there being a whole nother question show come up after I said duplexer and diplexer. So,
right, because remember, APRS is not despite the impression that I give on this show, it's not the only thing I do in amateur radio. Like I do go play with repeaters and stuff like that. So I mean,
we'll link to your video presentation on the run that you do. That's a very interesting. We did last time. I want to put it up there again because it's a very interesting presentation. That's quite a challenge, quite a big deal you pull off out there.
Yeah, it's the marathon. It's what is it? It's a triathlon. Yeah. So there's a swim and then a bike and then a run. So it gets pretty fast and hectic. So
I do one of those like once a year. I might swim once a year. I might run for 15 yards once a year. So.
Right. Where last year I think I supported 6 or 7 events. So yeah.
He's not just sitting around looking at the APRS trying to figure out how to make cutesy little add-ons. I mean, he's out there working it. So.
Oh yeah, and I'm just really glad that this can through this show I can reach so many more people and get them started in APRS.
Well, that's what we're trying to do here. What turned out as one man's problem, we found that there were thousands around the U.S. and the world who were suffering through the same thing. So, thank you for helping us get pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, Kale, you were just fumbling ahead of your time.
Yeah, hey, if I've got to be something, let it be that, right?
Yeah.
Thanks again, Kenneth.
Thank you.
A very special thanks to Kenneth Finnegan for coming back on with us, man. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, the listeners, for the questions that we received. And if this has stirred up more in you and you need to find out more, you want to learn more about APRS, if we need to do a third show, I'm up for it because I love learning about this. For whatever reason, man, this thing has bit me, and I want to see it working here where I'm living. If you guys are having some good experiences where you are, maybe you've got something you can share with the community. Remember, we're on Facebook and Twitter. We've got a forum over on the website. Everywhere you look, we are, and we want to be involved with you, whatever you're doing in the hobby. Hey, a big shout out to all the listeners who came in with their call signs for episode 73. A big deal. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it and hope you guys have enjoyed this program. Can't go without saying a big special thanks to my friends down at Main Trading Company. Yeah, don't forget them. If you need some gear, check out mtcradio.com, as well as our show sponsor, Elecraft. So excited to have them on with us here in 2017. Hamvention's on the way. We're still trying to make the booth reservations, but we're coming no matter what. So you guys be on the lookout for details following that. We'll see you on episode number 74. Thank you again for listening. God bless every one of you in 73, y'all.
Thank you for listening to the Ham Radio 360 podcast. Brought to you by Main Trading Company, Paris, Texas, and by Elecraft.com, hands-on ham radio. To learn more about the show, visit our website, hamradio360.com. 73s, y'all.